All right, so President Joseph Robinette Biden made a pretty bold statement the other day in a speech that he was giving in Poland, where he essentially indicated that he would be open to or in favor of regime change in Russia and removing Vladimir Putin from power. So first off, he pretty much immediately walked back this statement, and they came out and said he does not believe in regime change in Russia. But I wanted to play this clip for you guys so you can understand why people were kind of freaking out about all of this, and then we'll get into the latest on the actual peace negotiations with the ongoing invasion of Ukraine.
A dictator bent on rebuilding an empire will never erase a people's love for liberty. Brutality will never grind down their will to be free. Ukraine will never be a victory for Russia, for free people refused to live in a world of hopelessness and darkness. We will have a different future, a brighter future, rooted in democracy and principles, hope and light, of decency and dignity, of freedom and possibilities. For God's sake, this man cannot remain in power. God bless you all.
Okay, so pretty much the first 90% of that clip was just virtue signaling that he doesn't actually mean in any way, shape, or form, hope and light and democracy and freedom, etc. Everything that we've heard for, decades from imperialists who don't really care about any of those values and just use this like fluffy language. But the main part that people were obviously focusing on was the last 10% where he says this man, meaning Vladimir Putin, cannot remain in power. So again, everybody kind of jumped on this immediately and, took this to mean that he was in favor of conducting some form of regime change in Russia, whether that's, immediately with some sort of a covert operations team, or whether it's, by trying to squeeze him out by strangling the Russian economy and hoping that either the Russian people or oligarchs surrounding him toss him out of power. Now, none of those things is really realistic in terms of removing him from power, which is part of the reason why a statement like this, if they hadn't walked it back, would have been so stupid on the one hand, is because it's not even clear, number one, that would be an effective strategy. We've seen Vladimir Putin's approval rating actually go up since the invasion started, and a lot of that is because he is a dictator. They've been cracking down massively on the information that is getting to the Russian people, and so they aren't even necessarily allowed to, call this a war or an invasion at all. They're basically being told that it's, this denazification special military operation, that they're essentially liberating Ukraine from these evil Nazi dictators or whatever. So, the Russian people are not being given accurate information in this circumstance, which is part of the way why part of the way how Vladimir Putin has maintained his approval rating. So again, if you're going to completely crush the Russian economy in an effort to try to remove Vladimir Putin from power, number one, it's not even clear that that's going to work. It hasn't been so far. Essentially, the Russian people are starting to blame the West for the sanctions and saying this is just a part of this broader scheme to remove Putin from power or to attack the Russian people generally. So you are kind of feeding into that narrative when you come out and make statements like that, accidental or not. You can't just casually be calling for the removal of another head of state, especially not one that has enshrined in its military doctrine that they will use nuclear weapons and they will use the full force of the Russian military if the Putin regime is threatened. I mean, this is, not my opinion. It's not some speculation. This is just the openly stated part of the military doctrine of Russia, is that they will not stand for statements like that coming from U.S. officials. So you can, do what Lindsey Graham did and come out here and try to just pretend to be a big tough guy and say, we should assassinate Putin and somebody's got to take him out and, we need a Brutus, as he said. But like, at the end of the day, number one, it's not clear that this has any realistic chance of happening. And number two, it's not even clear that you would want this to happen. First of all, because again, of the nuclear threat or the nuclear escalation that this would pose. But on top of that, it's not even clear whoever would replace Vladimir Putin would be preferable, both for the ongoing invasion of Ukraine or for the Russian people, etc. You have absolutely no fucking idea who would grab the reins of power in Putin's absence. And so, it's idealistic to look at this situation and be like, well, I hope that there's this massive rising up of the Russian people, which it doesn't seem like there is right now. There have been thousands of brave protesters who have gotten arrested in this process, but it doesn't seem like there's that momentum for regime change within Russia. And again, you would then be creating a black hole, a vacuum, a power space that we've seen time and time again throughout history. All you got to do is look at Iraq or Libya, for example, that it's not always beneficial, even if you don't like the leaders of those countries, like Gaddafi or Saddam Hussein, right? You don't have to think that Saddam Hussein is a good guy to think that the United States should not go in and topple his regime and create a power vacuum that then allows for the rise of, groups like ISIS, for example. So it's like, these are two different questions. It's one thing to say, yes, Vladimir Putin is a violent, terrible, bad imperialist, but it's a different thing to suggest that you actually remove him from power, because you have absolutely no control over whatever chaos would ensue from that reality. Again, especially in a country that, unlike Iraq or Libya, does currently have nuclear weapons, enough of them to completely destroy all life on Earth. So not exactly something I would just be casually floating out there. Okay, so good for Biden for walking it back, I guess, but still not exactly something you should accidentally come out there and say. Now, again, on the actual peace negotiations, which is what people should be focusing on right now, it doesn't seem like anybody is, except for a handful of people out there. But here from Jake Johnson on Common Dreams, he says, "We are ready to discuss neutrality," Zelensky says ahead of new Russia-Ukraine talks. So a little bit of details. They say Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said ahead of the latest rounds of in-person talks between Kyiv and Moscow on Monday that his country is prepared to declare the neutrality from NATO, a move that could fulfill one of Russia's long-standing demands. So they're basically coming out here and saying, yeah, we recognize we're never going to become a part of NATO. This was something you could have guessed before the invasion, but some people would argue it wasn't even necessarily going to happen in the immediate future, regardless of whether or not Putin invaded. But there you go, Putin. If this is one of your actual main demands, then you've had that secured. So this is essentially him making a pretty massive concession here in terms of the future for security. But he says security guarantees and neutrality, non-nuclear status of our state. We are ready to go for it, Zelensky said in a video call with several Russian reporters ahead of a fresh round of negotiations between Russian and Ukrainian diplomats in Turkey. And they say the 4 Russian journalists involved in the call were reportedly ordered not to publish the Ukrainian president's remarks. So that's an interesting component of this, is that Russia, as Zelensky is literally conceding to what they've described as one of their main demands in this entire invasion. They're essentially telling the media, don't report that he said he was willing to give up NATO status. That seems extremely weird if you are actually trying to bring about an end to the war, or if you actually really cared about Ukraine becoming a part of NATO. It seems like that would be something you would push to basically act as a dub for you, or as a win in this situation if you were Vladimir Putin. So pretty weird that they would be telling their reporters not to report that. But they continue saying, Zelensky saying, our priorities in the negotiations are known, and Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity are beyond doubt. That's kind of a confusing portion of this, but he says effective security guarantees for our state are mandatory. Our goal is obvious: peace and the restoration of normal life in our native state as soon as possible. And they say in recent weeks, Ukrainian and Russian delegations have reportedly made progress towards a 15-point plan, peace plan that would include Kyiv renouncing its ambitions of NATO membership in exchange for security assurances. Again, not really sure exactly what those security assurances would be, but it's unclear how far apart the sides are heading into the new talks. So some important things there. Number one, giving up the NATO alliance perspective in the future, but also here the territorial integrity beyond a doubt. So this is where it gets kind of confusing, because up until this point, Ukraine obviously has not recognized Crimea as part of Russia, even though they took it in 2014. And they also have not recognized the eastern Donbass regions of Lugansk and Donetsk that they declared independence, and Putin recognized their independence. They haven't agreed to that. So if by territorial integrity, Zelensky is saying we're not willing to make any concessions of territory on the eastern flank of the Donbass region, then that could basically mean there isn't going to be any likelihood of a bringing about to this war, because it seems like Putin is also not going to be willing to give up the territory in the Donbass region that he has already tried to now conquer forcefully, but also that they've been fighting in since 2014. So that's a pretty big important thing here. But essentially, if Ukraine is willing to come out, they're giving up the prospects of NATO, they're giving up maybe some eastern portions of Donetsk and Lugansk in the Donbass region, and maybe you recognize Crimea as a part of Russia, then maybe there could be some more realistic peace talks. And again, this is me saying that that's a good thing, or that Putin is justified in doing any of this. It's just, a realist analysis of like, this is what they're demanding. This is what Ukraine could feasibly give up in these concessions. And if your goal is to bring about peace, which I think most people at least theoretically claim is their main goal, then if your goal is to bring about peace, then you're gonna have to understand that there are going to have to be inevitable, concessions that are made by Ukraine and concessions that are made by Russia that basically nobody is going to be happy with at the end of the day. But the alternative is you keep fighting the war, and more civilians are going to die, and more infrastructure is going to be destroyed, and that's not preferable. Or, even worse, you could end up with a situation where it escalates into a broader war, or, a confrontation between NATO and Russia, which needs to be avoided at all costs for, again, obvious nuclear reasons. But, hopefully these peace talks work out and they produce something. But those are the main questions that I still have in terms of what Zelensky is willing to give up in this situation. And it really just is absolutely wild that we have politicians, let alone a president like Biden, who is just accidentally or intentionally, I guess, again, kind of unclear, going out there and floating the idea that we remove Putin from power, just, again, bringing us that much closer to the likelihood of a direct confrontation, and really, at the end of the day, just feeding into Putin's own paranoia and the propaganda that he has been giving to the Russian people, that this is all part of some broader regime change strategy from the Biden administration.